Judith Barr. Well, I've been associated with First Step for 30 years. I started in 1988 as a volunteer and did an internship through my university for a social work degree. And I worked in many capacities at the shelter, residential, and I was associate director. I retired in 2012, and I remain a volunteer for First Step because I love them so much. First Step brings a sense of, first and foremost, I think, safety and ability to let families experiencing violence know they're not alone, and that people do believe them and do care and will support them in any way that is necessary to be safe. And I think the community's a better place because of First Step. Because First Step is doing things that, frankly, no one else wants to do, and that's very important. You know, throughout 30 years, there are numerous client stories that stand out, but the very first call that I took on the crisis line involved an elderly woman from my community who had told me that she had been in a doghouse all night. And I remember it was fall and it was cold, and I was stunned. I didn't know what to say. And I said, "Why did you go in the doghouse?" And she said, "Because he told me to." And I knew I was inexperienced. I was at a loss for words. But as I processed it with her, she told me she had 2 adult sons, but she would never tell them. It was too humiliating. But it was a case of emotional abuse and control that I found, maybe because it was my first one, it was so severe and so hard to believe. She wouldn't accept any help. She just hung up, crying, and I just was stunned. So that case really sticks with me. There were cases involving animals, dogs and cats and horses, where they were mutilated or hung upside down or severely injured as a way to control and intimidate and actually keep her in the relationship. I'm so proud that First Step is building a sanctuary for animals, because a lot of people stay because they love their animals and they don't want to leave them behind for many reasons, but often for fear that they will be killed, because animals are disposable, and it's a way to control and intimidate. A woman I worked with in the community had 2 young boys. They are now adult men, and from what I know, facing a myriad of problems. But they were so terrified of their dad when they were little boys, 8 and 10. I went to court with them many times where they cried and sobbed that they didn't want to see their dad, that they were afraid. You know, things like that stick with you. Another woman was sent to us from another agency because her story was so violent, so awful, they didn't believe she was telling the truth. And so part of her therapy or counseling was to journal. And she ended up writing a book. And the book was so full of abuse and violence from the time she was 3 years old. It was hard to believe. But this is what some women and children and sometimes men in our community are living with, this horrific violence. And I was so glad that she found a place that she was believed and that she was able to minimize the effects of 30 years of violence on her being, on her soul, on her spirit. I mean, I could go on with stories, you know, forever, but those are the ones that stand out in my mind. The changes in the system over 30 years, and as I'm thinking about it, it's actually 70 years, because I'm 70 years old, and I grew up in a very violent family. And back in those days, the police were at my house many times, but they never did anything. My father was never held accountable, was never told. The most he was told was go for a walk. The laws have changed. I was at First Step during the O.J. Simpson trial, and there was a lot of attention placed on domestic violence. And as I recall, it was about that time in the mid-90s when the laws changed. And basically, they made domestic violence like any other crime. It became a crime against the state. If somebody steals your car, it's a crime against the state. Prior to that, it was the victim had to press charges. And victims are terrified to press charges. There are serious consequences for many people when they press charges. So that change was pretty significant. It also brought an awareness to the community about the dynamics of domestic violence, and people know more. The police are trained. The police, most police are good guys. Most prosecutors are good guys. Through the time, the one area in the system that was pretty resistant were judges. We couldn't train the judges. Judges were hesitant to really back up the police officers and the prosecutors. I think that has also changed, and that's a huge piece. So I think the programs that First Step have in our police departments are phenomenal. The lethality assessments are something that is very, very necessary and was a long time coming. So the changes are huge, they're important, but with that said, they're not enough, in my opinion. That people still are afraid to call the police. Of course, immigration and undocumented people plays a huge role in that these days. And so that's a lot of people that are reluctant to call the police officers. So we need more. We've done a lot, but we need more. We need people to be safe in our communities and safe in their homes, and we need to keep working towards that. Well, the people that are associated with First Step, from staff that give huge chunks of their lives to the agency, and they choose to be there because they are passionate about the mission, which basically is to provide safety and believe that we should live in a world where violence isn't acceptable and perpetrators should be held accountable. The staff gives 110%, so there's a great deal of passion and great deal of love for the work. But the atmosphere at an agency like First Step is positive, it's nurturing. The board is dedicated. They're all extremely passionate people. There's many other things they could be doing with their skills and talents, but they choose First Step. First Step brings out the best in people, the best in the police officers that are, compassionate, and in our sexual assault program, we used to have first response, and the police officers would come to the agency. I saw many, many police officers with tears in their eyes just turn away because it's hard, and we don't realize how first responders, you're right there in the moment with the survivors, and it takes a special kind of person to do that. So I have nothing but praise and respect and admiration for the staff. And then I was quite active in the purchase and the initiation of the new facility and the building of the new shelter. And it's just awesome. It's fabulous. For the most part, residents have their own suite. Sometimes it's necessary to share the suite because the facility's almost always full, which that hasn't changed much in the 30 years. There's sometimes people that can't come into shelter, into a safe space because they need to. And now with the building of the ARC and the facility for animals, I think that will likely increase the demand for space. But the facilities themselves are pleasant, they're welcoming, they're nurturing. Remember it being hailed as just something revolutionary to have this type of facility. So it's a place that people can be proud to work at. You can be proud to have community members come in and take tours and to see how we honor the survivors by giving them a safe space, but a space that feels like home. It's well furnished, well appointed, and respectful of people's need to have something good in their life and something good to you know, lay your head down on your pillow, a nice pillow. It's a state-of-the-art model for our state and perhaps across the country. I'm not that familiar with other states, but I know in Michigan it's among the top of what's out there, and it's something to be very proud of. Happy anniversary, First Step. 40 years is a long time, and you have a lot to be proud of.